The table was dressed in its finest clothes, embroidered cloth smoothed down by careful hands, silverware aligned as if soldiers preparing for inspection, the turkey resting at the center of the table like a golden offering to an unseen presence. The air was thick with the smell of roasted herbs, butter, cinnamon, and sugar, the familiar scent that is supposed to mean safety, family, warmth. Laughter drifted through the hallway and bounced softly off the walls, mixing with the low hum of distant conversation, the clink of glasses, and the rhythmic tick of the old clock that had hung in the living room for generations. Everything looked perfect. Everything felt normal. And that was what made it so wrong. Because sometimes the most terrifying moments don't come with screams or shattered windows. They come wrapped in tradition, disguised as comfort, hiding behind gratitude and prayer. Love and fear, between memory and madness, between what was and what should never have been. Thanksgiving is meant to be a pause in time, a moment to look around and feel thankful for the people who remain, the moments that shaped us, the struggles that we survived. Yet for some, it is a doorway, an echo chamber where the past leaks into the present. In quiet suburbs, on lonely rural roads, in creaking old houses and unfamiliar apartments, unseen forces have chosen this day to make themselves known. Maybe it is because emotion runs deeper on days like this. Maybe it is because the walls grow thin when gratitude and grief sit at the same table. Or maybe it is simply because the human heart is most vulnerable when it believes it is safe. The first lesson that rises out of the darkness is the power of intuition, that silent warning system planted deep within us, the voice we so often ignore. Because it doesn't make logical sense, because it interrupts comfort, because it dares to question what we want to believe. Intuition is the guardian of the soul, and on one Thanksgiving night, it became the only reason a young woman survived. And distance had slowly turned her childhood house into a fading photograph in her mind. Still, when the invitation arrived in her mother's familiar handwriting, something inside her stirred. The letter was simple. "Come home for Thanksgiving. I miss you." The words were warm, filled with longing, filled with love. Yet the paper felt cold in her hands, and as she read it again, a faint unease crept into her chest. She told herself it was just nerves, just the fear of returning after so long. She packed her bags and drove the long, lonely road back to the town she had promised herself she would never see again. As her tires rolled onto the cracked pavement of her childhood street, memories rushed over her like a sudden storm. There was the mailbox where she used to wait for letters, the neighbor's fence she had once painted with her friends, the tree she had carved her name into. And there it was, her house, just as she remembered it. White paint slightly faded, porch steps worn down by the passage of years, curtains moving gently in the breeze, as if someone inside was watching her return. When the front door opened and her mother stepped out, Eliza felt the strangest sensation, as if she was looking at a reflection that was a little too clear, a little too still. Her mother's smile was wide, loving, but something in her eyes was hollow, like a dim light in an abandoned room. Her hug was tight, but her skin was icy cold, despite the warmth of the afternoon sun. Eliza tried to shake the feeling, tried to let nostalgia wash over her, but the unease clung to her like fog. Inside the house, everything looked the same, yet different. Family photos were rearranged, some missing, some placed where they had never been before. The air felt heavy, as if it had not moved in years. There was an extra chair pulled out at the table, and when Eliza asked who else was coming, her mother simply said, "Everyone who needs to be here is already here." As the light of day began to fade and the candles were lit, shadows stretched too long against the walls, bending in unnatural ways. Elisa could hear faint movements upstairs, slow footsteps dragging across the floor. But whenever she asked about them, her mother dismissed it as an old house settling. Every instinct in Elisa screamed that something was not right, that the walls themselves were trying to tell her a truth she wasn't ready to hear. When they sat down to eat, the silence between them felt like a living thing, breathing, waiting. Her mother lowered her head in prayer, but her lips did not move. It was only when Eliza reached for her glass that she noticed something carved into the underside of the table, fresh and raw against the old wood. Her own name stared back at her, scraped into the surface over and over again, dozens of times, as if someone had written it while trembling. Her heart began to race, and suddenly the footsteps above them grew louder, heavier, more desperate. Her mother lifted her head slowly, and when she looked into Eliza's eyes, there was no warmth left, only a deep, endless longing. "I have been waiting for you," she whispered, her voice not quite matching the movement of her lips. "You never should have left." In that moment, the truth shattered the illusion. Her real mother had died the year she left for college. A heart attack on Thanksgiving morning. The house had been sealed, left empty, abandoned to memory and dust. No one remained there. And the thing sitting across from her was not her mother at all. Eliza pushed her chair back carefully, forcing a smile so thin it trembled on her face. She told that thing she had left her suitcase in the car, that she would be right back. The moment her feet touched the ground outside, she ran. She ran past the porch, past the road, past the memories, until her lungs burned and her chest ached. She did not look back, because she could feel it watching from the window, could feel the weight of its gaze pressing into her spine. Neighbors who later spoke to the police insisted that the house had been empty for years, a silent relic of a family that had broken apart. No one had entered it. No one had lived there. And yet, on that Thanksgiving night, the front door had stood wide open, the candles burned, and the table sat set for a meal that no living hands had prepared. Eliza learned that intuition is not imagination. It is a gift, a warning, a sacred guide. And from that night on, she promised herself she would never ignore it again. The second lesson that comes from the darkness is that gratitude becomes most powerful when it exists beside grief. A family once gathered around their Thanksgiving table with an empty seat that belonged to the son they had lost the year before in a sudden accident. The pain of his absence sat with them like a silent guest, heavier than any living presence. As they joined hands for prayer, the room grew strangely warm, even though the windows were sealed against the cold. A familiar laughter, soft and distant, seemed to echo through the hallway. The scent of his favorite cologne drifted through the air. No one spoke, no one moved, yet every heart in the room understood. He had come home one last time. In that moment, their tears turned to smiles. They realized that love does not disappear. It only changes form, and gratitude for what was can fill the emptiest chair. The third lesson is that some traditions are soaked in memory, and memory can be restless. In a small town hidden between woods and winding roads, families passed down antique dinnerware for generations, using it only on special holidays. But slowly, people began to notice strange occurrences. Children claimed they heard crying when the plates were placed on the table. Adults reported wet footprints appearing on the floor long after everyone had gone to bed. A historian eventually uncovered the truth. The dishes had belonged to a family who once forgot their child at the river during a Thanksgiving gathering. The child drowned in the cold silence of abandonment. The dishes were not cursed. They carried a story, a lesson of attention, love, and care. When the town finally honored the lost child each year, the disturbances faded away, and peace returned. The fourth lesson is that silence can be one of the greatest dangers, and breaking it can be the greatest act of courage. One Thanksgiving night, as a woman sat alone in her quiet home, she heard faint tapping beneath the floor, slow and rhythmic, like a desperate heartbeat. Fear told her to ignore it, but something deeper pushed her to listen closer. The tapping turned into muffled cries. She called the authorities, and beneath the house they discovered a hidden basement where a kidnapped woman had been kept in darkness, waiting for the holiday to pass so her captor could escape town unnoticed. Because one person chose to listen, to speak, and to act, a life was saved. The fifth lesson is that presence matters more than any gift, any dish, any tradition. A man obsessed with his phone barely looked up as his family laughed around him on Thanksgiving. Messages, emails, meaningless notifications stole his attention, while precious moments slipped by. That night, a tragic accident claimed the lives of those he had ignored, and he was left with only echoes, haunted by the sound of voices he had chosen not to hear. The house became a prison of regret, reminding him that time is the most fragile thing we own. The sixth lesson is that forgiveness is the strongest form of spiritual release. Two sisters torn apart by resentment hadn't spoken in decades. Every Thanksgiving, strange and violent disturbances shook their childhood home, as if the walls themselves were screaming in pain. When they were forced to confront one another at that same table, tears broke through years of anger. As they embraced, the house fell silent for the first time in years. The haunting stopped, as if something had finally been set free. The seventh lesson is that faith is a shield, and love is its foundation. A family plagued by unexplainable misfortune discovered their home had been built on land once used for rituals long forgotten. Instead of running from it, they filled their house with prayer, light, kindness, and gratitude. The darkness weakened and faded, unable to survive where hope was fed each day. The eighth lesson is that, in the absence of light, love becomes its own sun. During a violent Thanksgiving storm, a home was swallowed by darkness as the power went out. Strange whispers drifted through the rooms. Shadows moved where there were no bodies to cast them. Terrified, the family held hands, sharing stories, singing songs, reminding each other of love. And slowly, the fear lost its power, retreating in the face of togetherness. These stories are whispers from the edge of reality, reminders that fear and faith often walk the same path, and that even in our darkest moments, the human spirit carries a flame that refuses to die. On this Thanksgiving, as you look around your table and feel the presence of those beside you and those who live only in memory, may your heart be open, your instincts sharp, your gratitude deep, and your love stronger than anything that dares to linger in the shadows. May every corner of your home be filled with protection. May every past wound soften with healing. May every nightmare be replaced with peace. And may the God of light wrap your family, your memories, and your future in His endless mercy and strength, as you give thanks with a heart that can never be broken, further than it can be healed and reborn through grace and love. Amen.